Welcome to What's the Point? A weekly discussion of truth, realities, challenges, theological and philosophical views, national policies, and international concerns.
All right, welcome to What's the Point? Today we're continuing with a series we have on the ministry of Paul. So last week we discussed his thoughts on grace and his theology on that. And so this week we're actually going to be talking about Paul's ministry and his thoughts on the church. So for the first question that I have for you guys, kind of a little bit of a background. Where did Paul minister the most? Was he traveling a lot? Was he just in one area? Kind of give us a background on the location of where he was doing his ministry.
Okay, if you remember the early church, the center of the first century church was Jerusalem. And Paul was saved on his way to Damascus. So that was not Jerusalem. It was some kilometers away. After Paul's conversion and talking to Ananias and some leaders, he did not really start his ministry from the mother church, so to say. He was a very active church planter. So he was starting churches. I don't even know if he even thought that it will turn out to be a church. He just went place to place, witnessing to people, and those people he witnessed became a church. A fellowship of believers, few at the start, and then became big, like the church in Ephesus, in Thessalonica, in Colossae, in Corinth, in Athens. So wherever he goes, he witnesses to people, and then teaches them, and then leaves and go to another place, and then comes back. I think in the New Testament, Paul had 3 missionary journeys. Like 3 going around. So then he came back. So that's the reason why most of the New Testament writings of his were really directed to a church that he once was involved. So where did he minister? Your question is he was planting churches in key areas of the known world, or the Roman world at the time, if you like to say it that way. And only then, after he had a success with 1 or 2 churches, was he invited to go to Jerusalem to meet with Peter, and sort of was like evaluated, is this guy for real? Is he teaching correctly? Can we leave him alone? It turned out that he was then responsible, with God's help, of course, to reach the known world. We say the known world to them at the time. That was only the world. They didn't realize how far it goes beyond them.
Okay.
Whatever was the Roman Empire, where Rome built roads, infrastructure, Paul would go there. Wherever the boats and ships can bring, to his knowledge, he goes there.
Gotcha.
So he was really a missionary, and that's the reason why he's called an apostle as well, in that sense of starting churches or starting God's work.
Gotcha. What do you think, Josh? Like, where do you have something to add to kind of what Dad was saying in terms of Paul's like ministry, like location wise, or what he was doing?
So the main thing that I think is kind of cool is the aspect that when we see Paul, he was his main thing was, he was a expert in the Jewish kind of customs, this and that. But it's insane how, and kind of funny how God calls him to kind of go to the spot that he wasn't accustomed to.
Mm.
That makes
Mhm.
sense. Which
or
is,
or or,
you know,
or he was a Jew. He was an expert in the Jewish culture, but he was actually ministering mostly to the Gentiles.
so
Whereas Peter was supposed to be not that learned, and he was assigned in Jerusalem,
So
where they
basically
were
like
more
opposite.
mostly.
I
Yeah,
think it's put that way. On both cases, they can see, wow, God's the one doing this, and that they need him, because maybe maybe both of them might get it twisted
Mm.
when oh, it was because of me. Oh, it's because he knew that, he was that's what he did. But then because it was so not, I guess they needed God, and it's kind of to show God's power in that.
Yeah. So I mean that's a big point because like as the churches grew, they might be like, "Oh, this is because of me. It's because I'm doing this or it's because I visited them." But like right now, it kind
No,
of
but what I
shows that
mean by that too, is that if they stayed, if Paul stayed in what he was good at, what he
yeah.
knew, then maybe in his mind, and maybe in the, I guess, in the Jewish mind, this and that, they may think, oh, it's because he studied that, he knew that, and this and that. I guess it doesn't give way
Mm.
to God's kind of, you know,
Like speaking through him and
good. And because I guess it's easier to kind of claim that, oh, you didn't need God on that because you had that. You knew about
mm,
that.
notice wherever Paul goes and witnesses there, presumably by the looks of it, he really trains disciples or mentees, if you like to do that. He really mentored them and then leaves. Now, as to how many days, how many months, depends, I think, on the development of whoever he can entrust the ministry. In other words,
mm.
he did not start, leave, and that the ministry died. The beauty with Paul's model was that in almost all, and I think even all the areas he went through, there were leaders left, or there were key people at least in charge, and so the church grew. And that's of course not Paul; that's the Lord's help uh, for in setting up His own kingdom. Uh, understand as well that Paul was able to do that comfortably because he had money. Paul,
Mm.
today, when you say he was a tent maker, I think I told this before. We look at him as now as a person doing tent materials, like for camping. That was not the case. Tents before were used as housing.
So he was like in
Uh,
construction.
so he was really in low-cost housing business in today. So he was big in the low-cost housing business. And that's the reason why he can move around without any support from the mother church. He could, where did he get all his money to pay for the transportation, for the food, for the moving around, when he was not being supported by any one of these churches?
Well,
He was
because the
using his own money.
churches weren't even churches yet at first. Like they were
Yes,
churches later.
yes,
So
No,
yeah.
for now,
I'm not.
it's
No,
traveling.
no. So we kind of get it twisted because a church it's not a
Like a
Building,
building,
location. Yeah.
it's a body. So
yeah,
then, but then the body at the time was in houses, maybe in
Mm.
tents.
yes,
Yeah.
So
yes.
So then the groups, like the churches that he had started or had planted, weren't really like he wasn't supported completely by those churches. Like he had his own money to go do what he was doing.
you did. You know what's sick though? I was kind of thinking about this. What if this is kind of
No,
this
he
is not
not.
this is kind of not, in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in, you can't see this in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Testament, but this is kind of not in, you can't see this in the, I guess, in the, New Test word, but I'm just thinking, what if he made houses, he made tents. Maybe
Hmm.
one of those churches he may have you know made them one. I don't know. It's kind of insane to
Uh,
think about.
Oh yeah.
actually, just that is a very good assumption or presumption that could really be true.
I know, kind of insane.
Because he was into the locust housing business, so we don't know. It's not stated in the Bible, but whenever he goes to say, if it was maybe
Oh, he's doing
before he
both.
leaves, yeah, before he leaves, he puts up a sort of a tent
That's a good
where they
point.
can meet, or maybe
Yeah.
makes the house better for
That's a
them to
good
meet.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Kind of
because
Because he
in
insane.
the
was not.
Bible it doesn't like put it line, like, oh, and then he walked here, oh, and then he wrote, it's kind of like a summary. So we don't know, like, if that's a very big possibility if that's the business he was in already, like, it doesn't make sense if he's in the housing business or something like that and not kind of
But
do
it
that.
makes
But
sense though. It's kind of sick to think about. That's kind of awesome to think about. Oh wow. I mean, that's kind of nice.
no, I
and
think
and,
so.
and Paul and Gary and Paul was not supported by any one of those churches. There was a time he asked other churches to help other churches, but not him.
That's big.
To help the Macedonian church, the a church in Berea or whatever. And at one time, he even challenged the church in Corinth, and he said, "You guys are supposed to be richer, but the guys there in Macedonia and Berea and whatever was that place are giving more, even despite the poverty." So
Mm,
he was encouraging the helping of churches, but not helping him.
yeah,
And
no, that's pretty
yeah,
big.
yeah.
So I guess that's a good like segue to the main topic of this episode, is that what are his thoughts on the church? He wrote letters to the different churches, like you had mentioned, that he had wrote a letter to one church asking them to give or help other churches. But what was his thoughts on the church in general? Like, what was his theology on it?
I believe that his theology of a church is not a building, but that a fellowship of believers. And I don't even know if Paul really thought of a church when he was doing this, because he was used to the Jewish culture of a synagogue, which is a temple, and he was not building temples. So he was not really referring to a building, but fellowship of believers in houses. So, number one, this concept of a church is not that of the Jewish temple or synagogue, but any place where there are believers. So it is
Mm,
the group of believers that constitute a church, not the building. And number two, I think he was the way he approached the church is he started with basics, the message of salvation, the message of Christ, the meaning of that. And that was what he was establishing from church to church. So if you look at his message to Ephesus, to Philippi, to Thessalonica, to Colossae, to Corinth, there are common themes in his
okay.
teaching, obviously because he had a template in mind of what to teach these
Mm,
people, which is a foundation. Uh, and So I think his concept of a church is the representation of Christ in a community, the
wow.
representation of God's kingdom in a community. I think that was his concept of a church. I don't know with Josh what he thinks about that.
Yeah, what do you think, Josh? Like, how did Paul, like, what did he see as a church?
I think what Dad was saying was good. The aspect of taking the body, the this kind of the believers, and then thinking about ways to, in essence, ways to what? Ways to practically look like Jesus. And
Mm.
so that was his, that's what he wanted to do, was to, show and to encourage each one of them, hey, now that we have been made new, the goal of life is to mirror Jesus. So that's what he does in these things that he wrote. So
Yeah. No, so that's pretty good because um I think that's important because a lot of people now, like in our day and age, kind of see church as like a building, you know. So how I guess my next one is, I'm sure when he was writing these letters, right? Like especially the one, for example, where he asked one church to give um or help out the other poorer church. Did he encounter any kind of issues or conflict while he was doing this? I mean, obviously he went to jail, um in the church aspect of it, did he encounter any kind of issues? And if so, how did he overcome it, or what did he teach in terms of when they push back?
Well, if you look at a survey or the introduction or the overview of each of those of his letters to certain churches, he was really addressing issues like the church in Corinth. His problem there is they were quite well off, I think, but they were carnal, they were worldly, and so he had to address a lot of worldly concerns of the church in Corinth. And I could not remember now which letter where he was addressing about the wrong doctrine that he has to address. And there were letters to encourage them because some of them were like already getting discouraged or disheartened. He also addresses issues of worship because and that's the reason why it came out that it looks like uh, in one of his letters, he was not encouraging women to be involved in worship, but understand that that was his response. I think it must be to the church in Corinth because the men were not doing their work. They were there in the city square sitting and having fun, I guess, but I guess they were like proud men sitting there in the city square. They left their work in the church, and so the women took over. And as is
Okay.
always, when they're not properly led, women can be hard to manage. You know that. And so, and so the church was a bit of a mess because of the leadership of the women. So that is not to mean, though, that women are not allowed to get involved, but that was particularly circumstantial or cultural in that place. I said, do not let the women bring back the men. So that is not to mean that in churches today we cannot use women in the ministry.
Now, could
That
it
was
also be
particularly for that.
at that time, right? It was a very patriarchal society. So the women weren't necessarily given, like they didn't have a lot of experience yet, right? So it doesn't mean that they weren't qualified. It could just mean that this was not something that they were used to. This is not something that they saw their moms do, or, so when they had to take over, they didn't want the church to fall apart. They did their best, but that's why Paul was like, we got to bring the men back because they've already had experience doing this, but now they're messing around in the city square. So I think that's a good point because I know some people have taken that out of context or have thought, like assume that exactly like women cannot teach or be in leadership, but it was a different time then, it's a different time now. Like times have changed. And even then, like it didn't really mean that they couldn't lead. It's just that's instance. But what do you think on that, Josh? Like on how he handled like issues in the church, or issue, like how did he
Sometimes he
handle
would
that?
cross-examine them. So then sometimes he would say, "Hey, this you do." He does a good job too of saying, "Hey, you do a good job doing this, but you kind of suck at doing this." So that's why it's nice to see
Mm,
it, because it's kind of, he does both. He says, "Man, you guys do awesome in money wise, and then but you guys suck at this, and then you guys do awesome in kind of I guess maybe love, and then you suck at this." So but it's nice because he often does both, not just kind of one. And so but when it comes to that, it's kind of nice to that sometimes he says, "Oh, his kind of quote is, do as they do, so do as this church does." And then so he sometimes says, "This is a good stuff that I see," and then says it to another church. That way they kind of get, "Oh man," they kind of see, "Oh wow, we should, we need to do that." We
mhm.
have we have to become this way. We know that this body did it, so we can do it too.
Yeah,
But it's
yeah,
nice because he becomes this kind of beacon of checking, and then if that's the case, then they kind of get. That's why they look forward to when he gives them these things, because then it gets them going, and that's his point, is to not give up, to keep going. And so with
yeah. And
that
I,
said though,
yeah.
one awesome thing, one case that maybe one can see is, he says one time, "Oh, do as the Bereans did," which what they did was, "Do not take my word for it, go check go and examine, and go
Mm,
and check. Don't just kind of don't don't just take my word for it. Check what it says. You know, and so that's nice, because that's the kind he wants to show. Hey, just don't take what I say. Just I want you to know you need to do you need to do it. You need to have your faith. You need to check these
yeah.
things to see if what I'm saying is the truth." So
Right. No, I think that's pretty big because he wasn't like cocky about it, where, oh, I was the one, I'm the missionary here, like I know. He's telling them like, no, check me, because he also kind of accepts that he's human, and this is what he's saying is from God, and so he's confident that what he's saying is correct because it came from God. But if there was some, if in the way that he presented it or whatever is an issue, he's kind of opening it up for them to also, like, as he gives them a compliment and gives them like, oh, you need to work on this, he's also okay with them letting him know that. um on the church, how it should be, or what he did when there were issues, then how can we use these to apply to churches now? That, if you want to start.
Well, in fact, yeah, well, in fact, this is really the irony, because a lot of churches today have forgotten the fundamentals of the real church that Paul was uh, teaching. Part of what Paul was teaching is in the churches today, but they have focused on other things that were not important insofar as Paul was concerned. Example, in America, the focus of the church is like consumer oriented. The
Mm,
church must somehow please or service the people well, so that they are kept. That looks good, but behind that is really because they don't want the people to leave, because there are a lot of payments to make. There's amortization to pay for the building. There are a lot of
mm,
stuff. So uh, the reason now is is becoming not the real premise. Now, let's have a church that is full service, with Starbucks inside, with library, with playgrounds, with all the things that will make our members happy when they go to church. I think that was not the context before. The context that they have to meet is to make God happy, not themselves.
Mm.
So, and then people today are allured or attracted to churches that are big. Now, mega churches, because it's full service. It's like nice music, good stuff. This is like what did my professor say about that? It's the not the invitation, but it's the what is another word of like you're being enticed.
Oh,
Another
it's
word
the
for seduction. He uses it. Seduction of the megachurch. Christians are seduced to the megachurch because it's all complete aircon, uh, cool, nice place. Wow, library, Starbucks, and everything. But in the church, it's not like that. No aircon, electric fan, smells bad. No, I will not go to the church.
And to them too, it's a
Uh,
win-win because it's a nice one that I can just go in and then get out. So it becomes a
yeah.
movie. That way I don't have to show them who I am.
mm.
I don't have to go deep for
Yeah.
them.
Yeah, no, and that's good. Yeah, because it's kind of hard to go deep if there's that many people, right? No one's gonna
And they
notice you.
want that. They want that because then you can just fake it. Because I can fake it for maybe a hour. You can do that, So
Yeah, you can fake it for an hour, and really, even if you weren't faking it too much, like no one's gonna notice because it's so big. Like you're not sitting next to the same. I mean, unless that's kind of rare, you could sit in the same section, kind of, but no one really like. Even when they do smaller groups or whatever, I mean, they try to do the small groups, but that's still something that like you should join, right? But if you're in a smaller church or like it's not a mega church, it's very easy. Like they'll know. Like if there's only like 30 people there and now there's like 20, that 10 are missing. You know what I mean? So
and not
it
not not
keeps you
just that, but they ask
accountable.
you, hey, how's it going? What you doing this week? You know what I mean? So you
Yeah.
can't
So
run, you
like
can't do
you
anything.
can't escape it. You can't escape, right? Like the accountability
You want to
when
hang out this week? Nobody's gonna ask that if thousands, you know.
yeah,
So
exactly. So I think that's a pretty big like the way that and it's not really just like a jab at it happens. I think that they start off with like a good idea, but then it becomes like you said, like they like so even for the Christians, it's like, oh well, I'm gonna go to this church because it has childcare and which is good for the kids, right? Like the kids can learn, but are the kids really learning or are they just playing in the playground? Because some of these mega churches it's like a play place in there. It's not like Sunday school that we had in Kazam. Like we had to go sit on the stairs, right? And like learn that we weren't playing. Well, I don't know about you, Josh. I think you were playing a little bit, but
no, I went up and then I went to the back. So
and then but the churches, mega
Yeah.
churches now, it's kind of um like it's a playground. Like I don't are the kids really learning any kind of biblical knowledge?
It's commercialized. Uh, it yeah, it's like marketing them to get into a mall. Now,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
remember the church. You do not go to church to be entertained. You go to church to be perfected through the process. And so, if you have a very nice church, services all your needs, but does not deal with how to develop your soul and your spirit, we have a big problem with the churches today. And look at the budget of churches. They spend more money building the building, which is unused. Churches today are the most unused infrastructure. They use it on Sunday, big buildings. No one uses it Monday to Saturday. That the problem with churches today is their budgets are more on the infrastructure of the building that is only used most likely 1 or 2 days in a week and not used for most of the week. Why won't instead, that's the reason why we in Kazam do not really have plans of building our own because it's very expensive. We would rather use our money in, say, mission work or evangelism, reaching areas like what Paul did, reaching souls, not building structures. So the budget of the church should be more towards reaching souls and discipling them, investing there, more than investing in a structure. Now, I might turn out to be, unless you can afford it, unless it's not that expensive. But example, a case in question, because we cannot afford to build a church in Manila. It's so expensive. So we have to keep renting and spend our money instead to, of course, pay for the pastors. I think over 30% of the budget of Kazam is to help other churches, to start churches in Batangas, Cavite, and other areas. So instead of just using all of that money to build our church, we would rather do what Paul did and use his money to plant smaller churches around the country. Now, I think that's the question with many mega churches or big churches today. They're so focused on their grandiose image in terms of a building and facilities. We should think more of souls rather than structures. So
Yeah.
I might sound maverick on that, but I think that's closer to the Bible, to be quite frank.
No, I think so too. And I think a lot of people like scrutinize the mega churches, those that go into, Christians that attend smaller churches or even unbelievers, which is actually the mega churches. I feel like even it's like a catch all, right, for everybody because it's so big and it's a lot going on in there, but it's actually deterring more people, like more unbelievers to even, because they see through it. Like people that the unbelievers see through it. They're like, that's a business. That is, you just built a mall and you are masking it into, Jesus doing this. And they always bring up Jesus was teaching in the grass. So like and so what's crazy is there's a lot of unbelievers that are better at quoting the Bible and in context than churches who use the Bible out of context to try to get what they want, done. So I think that the way that Paul was teaching is like the best way to follow. But kind of wrapping up, what is the point of discussing Paul's teachings on the church?
My what's the point is more for myself. Because I really patterned my own ministry and my life very close to the Pauline style of planting churches using his business. So I have, in a way, followed Paul's strategy. I have been questioned many times why I do not resign from my job or my business and go full-time. And so I said, I am already full-time. And I cannot be part-time, by the way. I cannot be a part-time businessman and a part-time pastor. There is no such thing. I'm a full-time pastor and a full-time businessman as well. So I don't know where this thing of a part-time and one time somebody really told me you are not giving. I think that's not fair. Because I said, if I stop my business, I cannot do what I think God has mandated me to do. More to pattern after Paul, and even a lot of my theology has been framed by the way Paul thinks. His theology is really like what Paul did is what Jesus was teaching in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. He tried to like digest that and convert that teaching into something understandable in the context of every church. I don't know if you see what I see there.
Yeah.
So it is not in conflict with what Jesus was teaching, but the application of that is what he was teaching around. So I also sort of follow that. So my point is that I am very much a Paul framework minded sort of servant.
What do you think, Josh? I know you're a big Paul guy too.
No, you're good. So to me, I'm a Saul. I'm just kidding. God, I'm just kidding. That's that's not. But when it comes to the what's the point, I think on the church side, it's the aspect of, he wanted them to grow. And so that's the main thing that we need to see. So maybe my challenge to those kind of viewing this is, if you want to know what it's like to grow, then go and check out go check out the Ian's, is what I say. So the books that end with the IANS,
Mm,
go check those out. That way you can see what I guess what we can do to grow. Is that, now I just kind of see this aspect of Paul. He was a busy guy. He had this tent making business going, this and that, but he wasn't too busy to be used by God. Okay.
mm,
Because oftentimes, God has made us unique, and he made us one of one and he gave us gifts that we can use, that we have. Now, the aspect is this: he has given us the ability, but can we give him our availability? Because oftentimes
wow.
that's what he wants the most. Because what good is it if you have ability, but you don't have availability for God? What good is
Wow,
that?
that's big.
That makes
No,
sense.
that's,
And then
yeah.
just to finish it out, I want to encourage those that kind of view us and kind of say, man, you know, what it, I can give you a case. You have you work from home, okay? Which means
Mm-hmm,
that you have this avenue to, you can think, since I have maybe some time, I'm a busy, yeah, you get busy, but you think, what can I do for God? I know this is one.
mm-hmm,
This is one that we do, but maybe
mm-hmm,
think, this one is good podcast, and maybe in this time I use it. Maybe find stuff, find ways. So the same thing with a view. Those watching, find ways within the scope and the job that you have, to just not say, "Oh, I'm doing this," for God. That's it. Find ways
mm,
to keep going. Add, not that that's gonna get you saved, but then it's, as Dad said, to get as much souls that to know about God.
mm. Yeah.
Okay,
That's
let's
really
just
big.
add,
Oh, go ahead.
let me just add one point. Maybe a reminder to those who are attending church. There are two kinds of people who attend church: the churchians and the Christians.
Mm.
And not all churchians are Christians. So if you are attending a church, please don't go there to be comfortable or to
Mm.
feel cool about it, but go there because you want to grow. And growing is not comfortable oftentimes, because
Mm.
it will break things that you thought are your source of happiness, but it will soon be replaced with things better than you thought.
Mm.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good. That's really good what you guys brought up, because some people go to church to feel good, to check a box. Like I went to church today, right? And then stop there. Um, so I think that, and then Josh, I really like your challenge of using, you don't have to be working at a church or in
Good.
a ministry um to be able to save souls, right? I think I really like what you said, that God gave us the ability, but are we going to use our availability? Because there's many times, and I know I'm myself am guilty of it, that sometimes I'm scrolling on social media too much, right? So that time that I was doing that, I could be doing something else for God. um and that's
Maybe
something
thinking
that
about,
I
instead of
have to work on too.
using that time to do on that, maybe think about, God, I'm gonna go get it alone with you. Show me what I need to do for you. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
he can say, oh, I want you to make a website, I want you to
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
But if you don't ask him, he won't show you. So maybe use that time to ask him, oh, because he might say, you know, I want you to do, as I mentioned, our website, I want you to do this business.
Yeah.
You know, I want you to make a book. You just don't know what he's gonna say. It might be something that's insane, but if he says it, it's gonna be good.
Yeah.
But we have to ask.
Yeah, no, that's really big too. I think that's a really good call to action. And if you guys don't have anything else to add, I'll go ahead and close us in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this time together that we can discuss Paul, and we can discuss the church and how and what church really is. A church is not a building, that it is a group of believers that are fellowship, are doing some fellowship for you, that they are worshiping you together. That's what church really means. And I pray that I pray for anyone who's watching this. I pray that they would get the call to action that we have in this episode today, that we may be able to use our availabilities to do more work for you. You've given us the knowledge in your word. You've given us the ability to speak to people in different ways, even through our work in our personal lives. So I pray, Lord, for anyone who is listening to this podcast, that they may be blessed, that you would help them really understand, and that they would seek you as to what you want them to do for your kingdom. Again, thank you for the time, and in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.